All right, welcome back. It's a Woman Wednesday on Liquid Lunch. I'm John Tobacco. He's Frank Morano. And both of us share a great affection for a good friend of ours, Roger Stone. And Roger Stone, as you know, in my view, and mostly in Frank's view, was unfairly prosecuted. He was, if you ask me, persecuted. And people who get close to Donald Trump seem to become indicted rather quickly. Someone who has been at the top of the heap, Miss Florida, and also at the bottom of the heap.
Well, no, I mean, I'll save it for WTF when I get to correct all your mistakes. She is, of course, a married woman, so she's Mrs. Florida.
Mrs. Florida, all right, fine. Can I just assume singlehood for a few minutes and let my mind wander? Anyhow, we're joined right now by Karyn Turk. She's a former Mrs. Florida, activist, political commentator, and she's now launched a new online series, Behind the Headlines. Unfortunately, Karyn, you have been in the headlines, and now you're turning that experience into a multimedia conglomerate. What's happening with Behind the Headlines?
All right.
We're not hearing Karyn. We were trying to get Karyn in the commercial break there. But apparently, according to many media reports, Karyn Turk captured national attention in early 2020.
Yeah, no, the viewers remember. It was a big story. I mean, it was a nationwide story.
Okay. Well, what was the story that they remember?
Well, that...
Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. Karyn.
There she is. Okay, we got her.
So,
Mrs. Florida.
Karyn, John was just asking me why you were so infamous in the story we all read about back in 2019. It was even reported that you took the pennies from off of your mother's eyes after she died. Straighten us out here. What were you actually convicted of? Why did you plead guilty? Do you think you got a raw deal?
I definitely got a raw deal. I pled guilty rather than spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting the federal government. I actually pled to a $17,000 misdemeanor for misappropriating $17,000. That was the real charge. If you read the headlines, it sounds unbelievable. But, you know, what happened to me definitely shouldn't happen to anybody, but it stemmed from a really vicious fight between a nursing home that was neglecting my mother and me. And that's how the whole thing started. And I wound up here.
So in this year, I'm sure you know, here in New York, I think our Governor Andrew Cuomo's actions were criminal in sending people back to nursing homes. Was this a COVID-related case with your mom in the nursing home, or no?
No, my mom actually died with a total of 9 bed sores all over her body. They were horrific, and it was just from total neglect on the behalf of the nursing home. And at that point, my hands were tied behind my back because of what I would consider a criminal enterprise down here in Florida that's actually a national problem, where litigious lawyers and caregivers and judges are all tied up together. And it's a conspiracy, and it's racketeering at its finest. It's financially driven, and I end up in that system, and I allowed my mother to end up in guardianship. There's 1.5 million adults in the United States that are in guardianship, and guardianship is not regulated the way that it should be. There's something called guardianship abuse, and she was definitely a victim of that. And they tied my hands, and I wasn't able to help my mother, and she died with horrific signs of neglect.
So this is an issue that I've been following for a long time, because on the radio, most of my listeners happen to be seasoned citizens, and I've seen so many seniors kind of get robbed, quite frankly, through this guardianship fraud. Tell people watching, what do they need to be on the lookout for? How do they know if their loved one may be the victim of guardianship fraud? And what can we do to guard against that as family members? And then what sort of reforms would you like to see the government implement to put a stop to this?
We need major reforms. There's very little regulation here in Florida of professional guardians. It doesn't take much to become a professional guardian, and it's not an industry that's very well regulated at all. So we have to start there, and we have to be very vocal about making change for our parents, for our grandparents, for our loved ones, because this is happening every single day all over the United States, and people are taken into guardianship without even knowing. There's a man out in Las Vegas, California, a man named Rudy, who's him and his wife were dragged from their home with a guardianship took place without them even knowing. And these judges and lawyers, it's criminal. It's absolutely unbelievable that this is happening in America. And as children and loved ones and parents, we need to go ahead and change things at the reform level. But in the meantime, you really need to be cautious. Anytime anybody mentions guardianship, I think it's something that you should run away from at this point. You want to avoid it at all costs.
Got it. Karyn, let me ask you this. Is there anything that people watching at home need to know for elder care, for end-of-life care with their loved ones? Is there a form that the parent can sign? Is there something that the lawyer can witness them consenting to that, hey, I don't want a guardian. Unless every single relative of mine is dead, I don't want some moron who doesn't have my best interests at heart looking over my finances. Is there anything people can do to kind of stop it, offset it, put something in place to at least slow it down?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you brought up some very good points. Having a durable power of attorney and naming one of your children. I mean, in my case, I actually allowed my mother to go into guardianship, and I was very naive. I didn't realize that this person wasn't going to be an advocate for my family. And I allowed it to happen. And I blame myself every single day for that. But that's why I felt that I really needed to become vocal about what happened to my mom and warn other people that these, in a lot of situations, I'm sure there's some people that go into this with good intentions, but there's a lot of bad apples out there. And, never, ever, ever allow someone to appoint a guardian unless, again, it's a situation where the person has no family members. So that durable power of attorney, things that your lawyer can do to give you estate documents. And for the children out there like me, avoid it at all costs. These people, in some cases, unfortunately mine, are not advocates. So I thought this was going to be a guardian angel.
Karyn, explain to folks, I mean, I think they're following the fact that your mom was mistreated and that you got a raw deal, but why were you singled out for prosecution in your judgment? Why would federal prosecutors choose you, of all people, who was one of the most powerful business journalists in the whole country, a beauty queen, and one of the, along with your husband, the Florida power couple? Why would they choose to focus their scope on you?
I think you just mentioned all the reasons why. I'm a Donald Trump supporter, and as a Trump supporter, it makes you an easier target. And I really do truly believe that that was a part of all of this. It made me an easy target. And the nursing home was actually the ones petitioning because I'm suing them for unlawful death for how they mistreated and neglected my mother. And in order to discredit me, they felt that they were going to make me a target, and they succeeded of doing so because of my political affiliations.
So, Karyn,
it made it easier for them.
Any hope of a pardon, do you think?
I can hope. I have some people that have been working on, trying to do that for me and working with DC. I'm hoping so. I wish that I didn't take the plea deal that I did. But, when you're looking at a $17,000 misdemeanor and you're told you're going to get, possibly just probation, and I had never had anything in my entire life, no criminal record whatsoever. Who would think that you would end up in jail and that you would have headlines splashed around about you that completely mislead people about what the story was?
Right. So, hey, Karyn, in our last couple minutes here, let me just ask you this, because my mom is in her, she's 70 plus, let's just say, right? Has all her faculties, lives right next door, thank God. But how do you go, what happens? Is a guardian appointed and then you still kind of control some of her money and you move it around, and then all of a sudden they come in and lock you up for 17 grand? How do I wind up in jail from trying to help my mom?
As soon as the guardianship is initiated, you have absolutely no control over what happens to your parent. I had no financial control. I had no control over how they were caring for her. I was contacting the Department of Elder Affairs and organizations trying to get them to help me, and was told the only person that they could speak to was the guardian. And the guardian sat back and did nothing. And quite frankly, what ended up happening is it was a financial motivation on the behalf of this lawyer who came after me for, a civil suit for the nursing home bill, which, when they're neglecting your mother and you're fighting with them and it's a contentious financial situation, I wasn't going to pay for services that weren't being delivered. And I felt that this would be, handled in civil court. You kind of logically think that that's going to happen. But, had I read the stories and looked at the other headlines, I would have realized that, this was a scheme and a racket to make money. And what they ended up doing is they placed my mother into a guardianship, and at that point I lost all control over what happened to her. And you have no control at that point. and I couldn't stop them from neglecting her. And now's my opportunity to fight back. I don't want her to die in vain.
All right. Well, Karyn, thank you so much. We got to have you back anytime you want. You want to spread the
Thank
news,
you.
spread the word. You got to go out and check out Behind the Headlines, investigative series, taking the viewers behind the headlines of the nation's biggest stories. And the first episode will set the story straight on why Karyn wound up behind bars for trying to love her mom. Karyn, thank you so much for joining us. We'll have you back soon.
Thank you so much.
That's Karyn Turk, former Miss Florida activist, commentator. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back after this with the WTF, What the Facts, in just a couple of minutes.